At 21 years old, Channon Christian and her 23-year-old boyfriend Christopher Newsom were known among their friends for their love of social gatherings and never missed an opportunity to spend time with close friends. That's why their absence from a best friend's birthday party they had planned to attend was particularly alarming. The celebration was taking place in Knoxville, located in the state of Tennessee, United States of America. The young couple not only failed to show up at the event but also completely ceased all attempts at communication, ignoring phone calls and text messages. None of those present at the time realized they were witnessing the beginning of one of the most horrific criminal cases that had ever occurred in this state. Channon Christian's life began in 1985 in the small Texas town of Nacogdoches, home to approximately 30,000 residents. The girl grew up as the youngest child in the family, with two older brothers, Jason and Chase. Her parents showed special affection for all their children, as the path to parenthood had been extremely difficult for them. Channon's mother faced significant medical problems that complicated her ability to conceive, and medical specialists expressed doubts about her ability to bear children. The couple went through numerous trials and difficulties before they could become parents, which made them especially cherish every moment with their children. At 12 years old, Channon moved with her family to the much larger city of Knoxville in Tennessee. This decision was made considering the broader prospects and opportunities that opened up in their new place of residence. The girl continued her development surrounded by family care and the support of numerous friends, while simultaneously receiving her secondary education at a local school. Channon and her parents shared a special emotional bond, with the closest relationship developing with her mother Deanna. This woman possessed the rare gift of being an attentive listener and could offer balanced, objective advice in difficult life situations, which led not only family members but also friends and acquaintances to regularly seek her counsel. Channon inherited this capacity for empathy and ability to help people from her mother, which naturally influenced her choice of future profession. After finishing school, she decided to continue her education in college, choosing sociology as her major field of study. Contrary to the common trend among youth of her generation who sought to gain independence from their parental home as quickly as possible, Channon felt no discomfort living with her parents. Their relationship was so harmonious and close that the girl could easily combine her studies with regular conversations with her mother about new knowledge and impressions. Their talks often took on a deep, confidential nature, during which they discussed plans for the future, including Shannon's dreams of marriage and a large family with 4 children. Despite her comfortable life under her parents' roof, the girl demonstrated a desire for independence and a wish to build her own life path through her own efforts. To achieve financial autonomy while still in the educational process, Channon took on 2 jobs simultaneously. This happened just a few months before the tragic events. Her hard work allowed her to independently save the necessary amount to purchase a vehicle, a silver SUV, a Toyota 4Runner model. This purchase became a source of special pride for the young woman, a symbol of her industriousness and determination. Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr.'s life journey began in 1983 in Knoxville. His arrival into the world became a true celebration for his parents, who had long awaited this event. Their love for their son was boundless from the first moment of his birth to his last breath. Little Chris was characterized by extraordinary activity and inexhaustible energy, which subsided only when it was time to rest. The boy showed natural abilities in sports, achieving the greatest success in baseball. Besides his sporting interests, he demonstrated a talent for working with his hands, which eventually grew into a serious passion for woodworking. Chris took pleasure in making various items for his family members. Upon reaching his teenage years, the young man became interested in 2-wheeled vehicles and harbored plans to become a professional mechanic. However, his interests later returned to carpentry, which he decided to master at a professional level. Even as an adult, Christopher maintained his love for an active lifestyle. He continued playing baseball, enjoyed golf and tennis, and used every opportunity to go fishing. Despite his numerous hobbies, he remained a person with a pleasant character and a kind heart. Chris possessed natural charisma that helped him easily establish contact with new people, while he never forgot about supporting his family and old friends. Fate brought Channon and Christopher together in 2006, when she turned 21 and he was 23. Their meeting occurred thanks to friends of Chris's parents, who had turned to Deanna, Shannon's mother, for advice in a difficult life situation. It was through these mutual acquaintances that the young people accidentally met, but this accident grew into something much greater. They immediately found common ground and began devoting all their available free time to each other. The couple regularly arranged romantic meetings outdoors, with their favorite shared activity being golf. During walks between golf holes, they could spend hours having engaging conversations on the most diverse topics. All members of both families, as well as their circle of friends, were convinced of the brilliant prospects of this relationship. Most believed that the young people would soon start a family, and all signs pointed to exactly such a development of events. None of their loved ones could even imagine that someone would want to take the lives of these young people in the most brutal and merciless way. On the evening of January 6, 2007, 23-year-old Christopher and 21-year-old Channon planned a dinner together. After the romantic dinner, they intended to attend their mutual friend's birthday celebration. During the day, Channon visited her girlfriend, where she prepared for the evening date. Other friends were meanwhile preparing for the birthday party. The girl carefully packed the necessary items in her bag and headed to the Washington Ridge apartment complex. She parked her own vehicle in the parking lot near the complex. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, Channon arrived at the meeting place and positioned herself in the parking lot waiting for her boyfriend to go to dinner together. Christopher was running late because he had to give one of his friends a ride home, which caused slight disappointment in Channon. When they finally met, there was a brief exchange of somewhat tense remarks between them, but soon they embraced and the tension instantly disappeared. However, the couple never reached their planned destination, and from that moment no one saw them alive again. The young lovers vanished without a trace. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Deanna, woke up feeling an oppressive sense of foreboding. Guided by maternal instinct, she immediately went to her daughter's bedroom, where she discovered with horror that the bed remained untouched. Channon had not returned home the previous night. There were no notes or other indications in the room that could explain the girl's absence. The worried mother repeatedly tried to call her daughter, dialing her number again and again, but each attempt ended with a redirect to voicemail. While checking her own phone, Deanna noticed a series of missed calls from unknown numbers that had come in the previous evening. Having failed in her attempts to establish contact with her daughter, the woman dialed one of the unknown numbers that remained in her phone. Shannon's friend immediately answered the call, and his words only intensified the mother's anxiety. The young man explained that he had called Deanna trying to make sure Channon was safe. From his words, it became clear that the young couple had not appeared at the birthday party. For both young people, who were always characterized by punctuality and responsibility, such behavior was absolutely uncharacteristic. They never ignored promises to be present at important events. Attempts to contact them by phone also proved fruitless. Concern gripped the missing couple's friends as well. Shannon's close girlfriend returned around 11 o'clock in the evening to the place where they had parted several hours earlier. In the parking lot, she saw the pickup truck belonging to Christopher, but there were no signs of Shannon's car or the young people themselves on the premises. Later, Deanna received a disturbing call from the manager of the company where her daughter worked. The man reported Shannon's absence from her workplace, which prompted the director, concerned by such atypical behavior from his employee, to personally inquire about her condition. This information transformed the mother's concern into genuine terror for her child's fate. Deanna immediately called Christopher's parents, but it turned out they were in the same state of despair. Their son was not answering calls, and his whereabouts remained unknown. United by shared grief, both families decided to immediately notify law enforcement agencies. However, disappointment awaited them at the police station. The authorities informed them that official procedure required waiting a minimum 24-hour period before beginning a missing persons investigation. Law enforcement officers demonstrated a dismissive attitude toward the parents' concerns, suggesting that the young couple had simply gotten carried away partying with friends and lost track of time. The parents persistently tried to convey that such irresponsibility was absolutely uncharacteristic of their children. They always maintained contact and had never before disappeared without warning. However, these arguments did not influence the police's position. Adhering to the formal rule about the 24-hour waiting period, the officers categorically refused to begin any action. Faced with a bureaucratic wall, the families of the missing were forced to independently organize a search operation. They began with a thorough examination of the parking lot, the last reliably known location of Channon and Chris. However, the inspection of the area yielded no results. Simultaneously, parents and friends launched a massive phone campaign, contacting all possible acquaintances and city services where the missing theoretically could have ended up. Unfortunately, these efforts also brought no success. None of those questioned had seen the young couple. In the afternoon of January 7th, a railroad worker made a gruesome discovery and immediately notified the police. He had stumbled upon human remains in a terrible state near the railroad tracks. The body turned out to be severely burned and had been left on the railroad embankment. The law enforcement officers who arrived at the scene examined the mutilated remains. According to preliminary assessment, these were the remains of a male person, but establishing any other identifying features at the scene proved impossible. When information about the discovery reached the families of the missing, they could not perform identification due to the condition of the remains. Specialized forensic medical examination was required. The relatives continued to nurture hope that their children were alive and did not cease their search efforts. Using technical capabilities, they gained access to the geolocation data of Channon's mobile device. The information showed that the last signal from her phone came from the Cherry Street area, near a telecommunications tower. This part of the city had a reputation as a criminal hotspot where the young couple objectively had no reason to appear. The area was away from routes to their friends' homes. To get there, it was necessary to travel a distance of approximately 10 kilometers, which excluded the possibility of accidental arrival. These facts gave rise to two main assumptions: either the couple consciously went to the dangerous area with the purpose of purchasing illegal substances, or they were delivered there by force, against their will. On Monday morning, January 8, the parents launched active searches in the mentioned disadvantaged area. They methodically drove through the streets and questioned local residents. Their efforts were crowned with partial success. Channon's car was discovered in one of the side alleys. Examining the vehicle, relatives noted with alarm that all items that could help with visual identification of the owner had disappeared from the interior. Obviously, this had been done consciously and purposefully. All of the girl's personal belongings were completely absent: decorative stickers on the glass, her favorite stuffed teddy bear, photographs placed on the dashboard. Absolutely everything had been removed. Not even such small items as a phone charger or the girl's personal headphones remained. The driver's seat was adjusted to the extreme rear position so much that the owner physically could not have driven the car, unable to reach the pedals. A pack of cigarettes was found between the front seats, which caused surprise since it was well known that neither Channon nor Christopher had the habit of smoking. The floor in the pedal area was heavily soiled, which sharply contrasted with the owner's habits. The girl was extremely proud of her car, which had become her first significant independent purchase, and always carefully maintained cleanliness in the interior. The combination of these facts unambiguously indicated the presence of outsiders with ill intentions in the car. It became obvious that something tragic could have happened to the young people. The assumption arose about possible kidnapping for ransom, but no demands from the criminals ever came. The parents urgently transmitted all collected information to law enforcement representatives. Since the required 24 hours had passed since the disappearance, the police finally began an active investigation. Law enforcement officers confiscated Channon's car along with all items discovered by the relatives of the missing for forensic examination. In parallel, forensic medicine specialists completed a preliminary study of the body found near the railroad track. It was confirmed that the remains belonged to a male person. The experts were shocked by the level of cruelty with which the murder had been committed. Numerous gunshot wounds, marks from blows, and signs of brutal beating were recorded on the head, neck area, and torso. The study also revealed the presence of male biological material inside the victim's body, which indicated sexual assault. The deceased had no footwear. The lower limbs showed traces of blood. The body was wrapped in a blanket covering. Some upper garment like a hoodie was wrapped around the head. After analyzing all available data, forensic medical experts came to the conclusion, before them were the remains of the missing Christopher Newsom. Fire had caused catastrophic damage to the young man's body, destroying the vast majority of forensic traces that could have helped the investigation. Police representatives strongly recommended that the young man's parents refrain from personal presence during the identification procedure. The only thing relatives were allowed to see from the moment of discovery was a black plastic bag that remained sealed in their presence due to the extremely traumatic nature of the contents. Despite this tragic news, Channon's parents continued to hope for their daughter's rescue, while expressing outrage at the police's passivity during the first critical 24 hours. There was a possibility that law enforcement's indifference could have cost the life of the second victim, whose fate still remained unknown. Having received new information, police intensified the search for Channon, engaging all available resources. There was a danger that the amateur inspection of the car conducted by relatives could have led to the destruction of important evidence. However, fortune smiled on the investigators. Detectives were lucky to discover a key clue that led them directly to the crime scene. On an envelope found between the car seats was an address, 2316, Chipman Street. Obviously, the criminals had carelessly lost this envelope while using the stolen car. The indicated address corresponded to a location situated 10 kilometers from the point of last reliable sighting of the couple. At the same time, the house was located only 2 blocks from the alley where Channon's car was abandoned. Law enforcement officers immediately began forensic examination of the envelope, aiming to detect fingerprints. Their efforts were crowned with success. Clear fingerprints were found on the paper surface. After entering the obtained data into the police database, the system produced a match. The prints belonged to a person named Lemaricus Davidson, who had recently been released after serving a 5-year sentence for a crime related to unlawful possession of a vehicle under aggravating circumstances. Considering his criminal past and the evidence found, the man instantly became the main person of interest in the investigation of Christopher's murder and Channon's disappearance. At night on January 9, a police unit arrived at the suspect's residence. Davidson lived in an old rented dwelling located in the city's industrial zone, where residential buildings were scarce. Officers knocked loudly on the door but received no response. Considering reasonable suspicions that Channon might be inside the premises alive and held there by force, law enforcement made the decision to forcibly enter the dwelling. Moving through the rooms, police officers sequentially discovered personal belongings of the missing young people. Among the findings were Channon's personal headphones, Christopher's shoes, and his favorite baseball cap. This evidence confirmed the correctness of the chosen direction of investigation. But the most terrible discovery awaited officers ahead. In the kitchen area they came upon a large trash container. Looking inside, law enforcement officers saw a soiled sheet that concealed a voluminous plastic garbage bag. Upon opening the package contents, officers discovered the lifeless body of 21-year-old Channon. Investigation representatives immediately notified the parents about the tragic fate of their daughter. She would never again cross the threshold of her family home. In contrast to the burned remains of the young man, the physical condition of the girl's body allowed for detailed examination. The picture of abuse seen by experienced forensic experts and police detectives caused them genuine shock. The scale of cruelty applied to the defenseless victim exceeded the worst expectations. Of clothing items, only an undershirt remained on the body. The entire body surface was covered with numerous bruises and contusions of various sizes, multiple deep wounds inflicted while alive, and horrific traces of thermal injuries. Forensic examination of the body revealed biological traces of the criminal, remnants of his sexual secretions, genetic material, and fingerprints. Part of the fingerprint evidence matched those recorded on the trash container, plastic bags, and in the interior of the stolen car. All of them belonged to the same Lemaricus Davidson. Additionally, in the premises that had turned into a place of torture, investigators discovered a large number of shell casings. Ballistic examination confirmed that they came from the same firearm used to kill the deceased girl's boyfriend. However, the merciless criminal himself was not found in the house. The dwelling was empty. Evidently, the suspect had anticipated the possibility of a police visit and disappeared in advance. Law enforcement immediately declared him wanted at the state level. A large-scale operation began to search for and apprehend the dangerous criminal. However, investigators did not yet realize that Davidson was not the only participant in these horrific tortures. Other individuals had also witnessed the final hours of the young couple's lives. Detailed analysis of Lemaricus's phone contacts revealed numerous calls to a person named Eric Boyd during the days when the crime occurred. Police quickly established his identity and whereabouts. The very next day, a patrol unit stopped a car driven by Boyd. Officers directly asked about Davidson's whereabouts. Eric Boyd initially showed slight resistance, trying to avoid a direct answer to law enforcement's questions. But under psychological pressure, he quickly gave in and revealed information about his associate. The man emphasized that he had no intention of answering for crimes committed by others and informed officers that the main suspect was hiding in a building that the criminals had robbed on the same day the young couple was kidnapped. Boyd personally escorted police to one of the abandoned buildings listed on the real estate market. The property was located not far from the main person of interest's residence. Inside the premises, officers discovered chaotically scattered trash bags, remnants of food packaging, clothing items, a mobile phone device, a firearm, and an optical observation device, binoculars. Most importantly, amid this chaos was Lemaricus Davidson himself. Police immediately arrested the suspect and transported him to the station for investigative procedures. A notable detail was that at the moment of arrest, the detained person was wearing Nike sneakers that belonged to the murdered young man. During interrogation, Davidson made efforts to present himself as an accidental victim of circumstances. The suspect voiced approximately 5 different versions of events that allegedly led to Chris and Channon appearing at his residence. According to the first version, the young people independently came to his house, but his acquaintances followed them. These individuals allegedly attacked the couple and brutally beat them, while Davidson himself did not want to intervene in the conflict due to the obvious inequality of forces. According to his words, he decided to leave the scene. Davidson claimed he used the girl's vehicle exclusively for a trip to neighboring blocks to sell narcotic substances while the situation calmed down. After finishing his business, he allegedly left the car in a side alley. According to the suspect's words, when he returned to his dwelling, the girl supposedly was still there in a bound state and begging for release. However, he claimed he did not interfere in the situation. Lemaricus categorically denied his participation in the young man's murder and also firmly denied the fact of intimate contact with Channon, despite the fact that examination later confirmed the presence of his biological material on the victim's body. In his testimony, Davidson named 2 young men who allegedly carried out the attack on the deceased, George Thomas and Letalvis Cobbins. Thomas was a close associate of the main suspect, and Cobbins was his half-brother. Both were arrested on January 11 on suspicion of complicity in murder. But the circle of those involved in the brutal massacre turned out to be wider. At that point, the list of suspects already included the previously mentioned Eric Boyd, the very one who had shown police Lemaricus's hideout. Later, Davidson reported the participation in the torture of another person, their acquaintance Vanessa Coleman. At the time of the criminal acts, the girl had barely turned 18 years old, while the ages of the male accomplices ranged from 24 to 35 years. The combined testimony of all those detained allowed reconstruction of the horrifying picture of Channon and Chris's final hours of existence. Each of the detained added their own fragments to the overall picture of terrible details that gradually unfolded before investigators. At the same time, all suspects systematically tried to minimize their own participation in the crime, shifting the main responsibility to other participants. The investigation established that the leader of the criminal group was Lemaricus himself. On that fatal evening, he needed a vehicle to fulfill an order for delivering narcotic substances to a client. Through a tragic coincidence, he and an accomplice came across Channon, who was just talking with her boyfriend in the parking lot. Instead of simply stealing the car, the criminals decided to eliminate potential witnesses, the young couple. Using firearms as a means of intimidation, they seized the vehicle and forcibly delivered the victims to the gang leader's residence, where inhuman suffering awaited the young people. Letalvis insisted on his non-involvement in sexual violence against the victims. However, the results of genetic examination of collected biological samples refuted his claims. Analysis confirmed his participation in raping the girl. The leader of the criminal group repeatedly committed similar acts. The detained girl, participant in the crime, claimed that she herself found herself in the position of a hostage, similar to the victims. According to her words, fear for her own life forced her to simulate cooperation with the criminals and provide assistance in restraining the kidnapped couple, although these actions were repugnant to her. Careful study of genetic samples obtained from all crime participants allowed law enforcement workers to reconstruct the chronology of torture down to the minute, 24 hours of inhuman suffering that ended with the death of 2 innocent young people. Channon and Chris were bound immediately after kidnapping right in the girl's car interior. The criminals placed them in the back seat of the vehicle and delivered them to the residence of the criminal group's leader. The victims were tied in such a way that independent escape was impossible, and their mouths were gagged with improvised gags to suppress screams for help. The girl was left in the main room of the house, while the young man was moved to an adjacent room. There he was firmly shackled and subjected to multiple acts of sexual violence. Several people participated in these acts simultaneously, but the investigation could not precisely identify each participant. With the onset of morning, the young man was led out of the premises using a chain like a dog leash, after which he was placed in the car's trunk compartment. The victim was transported to the railroad track, where he was forced to walk barefoot on sharp stones of the railroad embankment. The young man walked approximately 20 meters forward. Then the first shot rang out, hitting his back, followed by a second, in the neck area. However, these wounds did not prove lethal for Chris. The third shot became fatal, fired from minimal distance directly into the head after a few seconds. The bullet damaged brain tissue, ending the suffering of an innocent person. After this, the body was doused with fuel liquid and set on fire to destroy most forensic evidence of torture. Meanwhile, Channon was fighting desperately for her existence in the criminal's leader's residence, completely unaware of the tragic fate of her beloved. After returning from the site of the first murder, the criminals switched their attention to the girl hostage. They subjected her to prolonged beating, resulting in multiple severe skull and brain injuries. Subsequently, the victim was attached to a chair and subjected to repeated acts of group sexual violence. After this, the girl was knocked to the floor surface and they continued to deliver blows to her face, head, and intimate area. Over 48 hours, she was systematically tortured and raped, causing numerous internal tears of the sexual organs. The victims suffered from internal hemorrhaging but remained conscious. After a certain period of time, the crime participants decided to eliminate all evidence of their sadistic actions. For this purpose, they used household bleach. All 5 participants poured the chemical substance on the girl's body while she was still alive, trying to erase fingerprints and genetic material. The criminals poured the aggressive chemical substance directly onto the victim's open wounds, but this proved insufficient for them. They began pouring bleach directly into Channon's oral cavity, trying to destroy evidence from inside the organism. In parallel with this, the monsters tried to mechanically scrape off the upper layers of skin covering. Despite all these inhuman tortures, the girl remained conscious and continued to plead for rescue and preservation of life. However, her pleas met with complete emotional deafness from the torturers. The next stage was placing a plastic garbage bag over the victim's head. The bound girl in a living state was placed inside garbage bags and stuffed into a kitchen waste container. In this enclosed space, her slow agony occurred. Forensic medicine specialists could not establish the exact duration of Channon's pre-death suffering. However, they unequivocally stated the extraordinary level of brutality of the torture methods applied. The nature of the sadistic actions and inflicted bodily injuries went beyond standard forensic categories of cruel sexual violence and murder. Even for police veterans and forensic experts with many years of experience, this was excessive. The victim had a completely torn lip and fracture of the cervical vertebrae, which probably occurred during the beatings. Leaving the girl to die from suffocation in the garbage container, the criminals left the premises. After completing the bloody massacre, Lemaricus transferred some of Channon's personal items to his acquaintance Vanessa, the very one who was an accomplice in the torture. Law enforcement discovered these items during a search of her residence. Investigative agencies expressed serious doubts about Vanessa Coleman's claim about her status as a victim of circumstances. She had the opportunity to contact police immediately after leaving the gang leader's house but did not take advantage of this opportunity. Additionally, during the search of her dwelling, a personal diary was found where she described in detail and with emotional uplift all acts of violence against the couple, characterizing them as an exciting summer adventure. Analysis of the stylistics and emotional coloring of the entries unambiguously indicated her voluntary and active participation in the torture. Lemaricus Davidson and George Thomas were charged on 16 counts, including murder with special cruelty, multiple instances of sexual violence, robbery, unlawful deprivation of liberty, and murder under aggravating circumstances. Vanessa was charged with 12 counts of accusations, including participation in murder, complicity in sexual violence, robbery, kidnapping, and theft. She played an active role in the abuse of both victims. Eric Boyd was charged with 20 counts of sexual violence under aggravating circumstances, kidnapping, and theft. The fifth member of the criminal group, Letalvis Cobbins, was charged with 20 counts under similar articles as the rest of the participants in the bloody gang. However, the suffering of the deceased's families did not end at this stage. The trial stretched for almost 24 months, during which the legal status of the case and various procedural matters were subject to numerous revisions. During court hearings, the gang leader presented a new fantastic version of events. According to his words, the deceased couple allegedly voluntarily visited his residence to participate in group intimate entertainment. Supposedly everything initially occurred by mutual consent, but then his associates arrived who crossed boundaries and began brutally beating the young people. Naturally, this absurd version found no credibility. Despite the persistent efforts of defense attorneys, they failed to achieve acquittal for their clients. The jury panel delivered a guilty verdict on the overwhelming majority of charges brought. Family members of the deceased insisted on applying the death penalty for these sadists, arguing that the level of atrocities committed could not be described by standard forensic terminology. Adequate legal formulations simply did not exist to characterize their actions. Lemaricus Davidson was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death with an additional term of 80 years of imprisonment. Eric Boyd, George Thomas, and Letalvis Cobbins received life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2010, Vanessa was acquitted of first-degree murder charges, but she still received 53 years of imprisonment on other, less serious charges. An unexpected turn occurred when all convicts initiated the procedure for appealing their sentences. In January 2011, Judge Baumgartner announced his resignation and publicly admitted his addiction to psychoactive substances. This called into question the legality of all sentences he had issued, including dozens of other cases. The state Supreme Court ruled, since the sentences of Davidson and Cobbins were based on indisputable genetic evidence, they remain in effect, while the rest were subject to review. As a result of the review, Vanessa was again found guilty on the same charges, but the term of punishment was reduced. From then on, she had to serve 35 years behind bars. George Thomas, initially sentenced to life without parole, received the opportunity to petition for parole after 51 years of imprisonment in exchange for cooperation with the investigation. Vanessa and Thomas continued to file appeals, but all were rejected by judicial authorities. Eric Boyd admitted guilt on 36 new counts and appeared before the court again in 2019. His guilt on almost all episodes was proven by testimony from his accomplice George Thomas. Boyd was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole with additional punishment of 90 years of imprisonment. In 2014, Vanessa formally received the right to petition for parole after serving only 7 years of punishment. Fortunately for justice, all her petitions were rejected. The last such decision was made in 2020, when a special commission ruled that she would not have the right to consideration for early release until 2030. In 2008, the building that became the site of inhuman torture of the young couple was demolished. A memorial complex dedicated to the memory of Channon and Chris was established on this territory. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.